Good afternoon, everyone. The Torah provides in this week's parsha something that's called the Korban Oni, a sacrifice that is brought by a person who is impoverished. He doesn't have any money. Now, to bring a bull, in today's market, for instance, a bull costs 4,000 to 5,000 shekel. And to bring a keves, a sheep, is also a considerable amount of money. It's a few thousand shekel. And a goat, so you're talking substantial money. So we can understand that regarding korbanot tzibur, communal sacrifices, so the Gemara says, Ein anius b'tzibur. So Ein anius b'tzibur has many nuances of meaning. One is that the tzibur is never really poor, because we have a wider base of support, so therefore somehow the funds can be raised. But another interpretation, which the Meforshim say, is Ein anius b'tzibur. When it comes to the tzibur, there's no allowance for anius. The tzibur cannot bring a korban oni because of the fact that it represents the entire community. The community is not poor. And Chazal added to that the idea of Einoni ala bedas, that the wealth and poverty are relative terms, and it's how a person considers oneself. There are people that are very, very wealthy and they consider themselves to be poor. And there are people who don't have that much, but they don't feel that they are poor. But there certainly is something that is called poor. Person doesn't have money to buy a korban. He wants to bring a korban. He feels impelled, he will go to Mechatas, a korban osham, and it runs into the thousands of shkolim, and he doesn't have it. Now, we have a parallel halacha, if you'll keep it in mind, and that is that one should not borrow money when one has no visible means to repay it. It's almost an Yisur in the Torah. It's a core of the Gezel. You borrow money, and you know your salary will not allow you to make the payments. And therefore, what right did you have to borrow the money? But on top of that, the Torah says, Rabbi Akiva said, "Shot nevela b'shuko al titztarech lebrios," which means to accept a lowly stature, even to skin hides of dead animals in the marketplace, a job that was considered to be, at the low rung of honor. But don't come on to the people. Don't ask for money, which is something that unfortunately is honored in the breach. There are a lot of people that They spend their whole lives coming on to other people. It becomes an ingrained habit. Asking for money is an addiction. No less an addiction than alcoholism or drugs, which is a physical addiction. This is a social addiction. To rely upon others. So the Torah didn't want that. So the Torah doesn't want you to go out and borrow 5,000 shekel that you can't pay back in order to bring a korban. Or the Torah doesn't want you to go around asking people for money so that you could have money in order to bring a korban. The Midrashim point out and the Meforshim point out that the problem with korbanos is the Rabboni Shalom Rachmana Liba boy. He wanted you. And to bring a korban of questionable acquisition, it defeats the whole purpose. He borrows 5,000 shekel that he'll never be able to pay back in order to bring a korban for a sin that he committed. So he's committing a sin to get rid of the sin. And we find that in the Nevi'im all the time. The Nevi'im rail against false korbanos. The Novi says, Yeshayahu, right? Hachofetz Hashem, the Rabboni Shalom wants this. You missed the whole point. So the Torah provided it in this week's parsha that a poor man can bring flour and oil, which, for 100 shekel, you get the whole thing. Now, it has to meet certain requirements. The solas, you have to try and bring it from good flour, refined flour, and from olive oil that has been crushed and refined, but that's a korban. And in the eyes of the Ochel of heaven, the korban of a poor man is equal to the korban of a very wealthy body. The man brought a prime bull, a prize-winning bull. In America, there always, remember from my days in the OU, there were prize-winning cattle. I don't know how they decided that this behemoth, had a yichus, but anyway. And they would pay fortunes for it. Because I remember one year there was a steer raised in Texas, and they paid over $30,000 for the steer. And then naturally they slaughtered the steer. And then they charged the outlandish prices for the meat from that steer. So it ended up that the guy that paid $30,000 made another $50,000 on it, because he charged $500 a steak or something, and people pay it. The yichus, the prize-winning steer. The Torah wanted to avoid all of that. The Torah wanted us to focus on the issue, and therefore the Torah provided that a poor person could bring a korban, and the korban would have the same effect. It would bring the same forgiveness. Now, the Meforshim point out one of the problems that was involved is that the Kohanim, so to speak, they made a living from the animal korbanos. There were 24 gifts to the Kohen, and parts of the animal, cheekbones, stomach, etc. Important parts of the animal went to the Kohen, So the Kohanim were in the meat business. It was kodshim, but they sold it amongst themselves. So this guy comes and brings flour and oil, can't do much with it. So it required, again, a certain mindset. So the Navi said, "V'sifsei Kohen yishmeru das." The Kohen has to have das. Das is not only knowledge, it's seichel, which is more than knowledge. You know, the Yiddish Cycle took on a different dimension completely. There was a famous orator, remember that he said that about the Jewish people, he said, it says, the Jewish people are such an am chacham v'novon, wise and understanding and knowledgeable, great people. So he said, if the am chacham v'novon would only have a little seichel, it would be good. And that's true. So the Kohanim were not in favor of it, because their self-interest was, you know, to bring a $50,000 animal than to bring a $100 pinch of flour. So the Kohen had to be Kimalach Hashem Tzvokos, the Navi says. If the Kohen is comparable to an angel, then Torah Yavakshu Mipiyu, then you can learn from him, then he's entitled to be a Kohen. But if he is not in that level, so then it's a problem. And that's what the Navi says, Yeshayahu says, HaKohanim poshu me. The Kohanim betrayed me, God said, because they were in it for the they're not always popular ideas. But the idea that one should not overreach financially, it's better to bring a korban oni than to bring a korban osher that you can't afford, and that you're using other people's money in order to do it, defeats the whole purpose of the korban. And the idea that the korban oni is equal to a korban osher in heaven. Because Rahman Aliba boy, God looks at the intention, at the sincerity. What was the mindset of the person that brought it? And therefore, with the correct mindset, then the little flour and oil is sufficient. Because Hashem let the Rebbeinu Shalom lead your animals. I mean, when you read Tanakh, when you read what the Nevi'im are talking about and emphasizing over and over again, so people make the mistake that the Nevi'im somehow, God forbid, were opposed to animal sacrifice. But that's not true. That's not what they're talking about. They're talking about the falsity and the obnoxiousness of people that use it not to bring forgiveness for sin, but to increase their sins. And that's where the problem lies. So those are ideas that are germane to us as well. They exist in our time. And there are circumstances that we can all make comparable judgments regarding. And therefore, when the Torah talks about it, the Torah, as always, is talking about you and about current events and about how to see the world. And through that, then the Korban has the necessary effect. Rabbi Hanani ben Akai Shlomer Otzakos Baruch Hu B'Zakos Yisrael Shlichot Chibur Lahem Torah Mitzvot Shenemar